And now to introduce our 2 o'clock Interfaith Lecture Series here in the Hall of Philosophy, where we are pleased today not to have a storm of biblical proportions.
Amen.
And we're not expecting a swarm of locusts either, thank goodness. And where this week we are presenting the theme Food and Faith, a twofold nourishing topic which our guest today is here to present. Our distinguished guest today is indeed Dr. Zahra Jamal. Dr. Jamal is Associate Director of Rice University's Boniuk Institute for Religious Tolerance. She was previously on the faculty at Harvard, MIT, the University of Chicago, Michigan State University, and Palmer Trinity. Holder of a master's and PhD from Harvard and a double bachelor's from Rice, Dr. Jamal has consulted for the UN, the State Department, the Aga Khan Development Network, the Swiss Development Corporation, and the Aspen Institute. She lectures widely on all things Muslim and brings to this week a welcome and fulfilling Muslim perspective on everyday spirituality in food. I am personally delighted to welcome Zahra because she and her family are personal friends, both mine and of the Department of Religion, and obviously longtime Chautauquans. Her uncle Habib Jamal and her father Nasser Jamal were part of the Middle East Task Force convened by Dr. Bratton in the mid-90s, of which I was also a member, as was former religion director Ross McKenzie. It was out of that Middle East Task Force that the Abrahamic program was born, and the Jamal family and other Ismaili friends were very much a part of that beginning. Subsequently, Habib and his wife Diana have come frequently to Chautauqua and brought their family, as did Nasser and Yasmin, bring Zahra and her brother. Then Zahra and I met again when she was a graduate student at Harvard and I was at Harvard Divinity School, as we both studied with Ali Hassani, who is another friend who has presented here at Chautauqua many times. I'm very pleased to let you know that Zahra's husband, Ali Ghulam, has joined us here today, as well as her uncle Habib and Aunt Diana. And we are so very pleased to welcome Habib and Diana back and to welcome Ali for the first time. Let's ask them to stand so that we can give them a special Chautauqua welcome. A welcome with great appreciation. We also send special greetings to Nasser and Yasmin, who will be seeing Zahra's lecture in Tanzania via video eventually, where they are there as volunteers in community development, I will add. And we're very grateful that they have this commitment to bringing world peace through this soft global peacemaking that they're doing through volunteerism. The title of Dr. Jamal's lecture today is Food for the Soul, a Muslim Perspective. We are grateful to the Joan Brown Campbell Department of Religion Endowment for providing funding for this week's Interfaith Lectures. Joan is our dear former director of the Department of Religion, and if our Joan is here, let's please give a special shout out to her as well. The Department of Religion is greatly pleased to welcome longtime Chautauquan Zahra Jamal to this podium. So now please join me in welcoming Dr. Zahra Jamal.
Thank you, Maureen, for that very warm introduction, and thank you to Reverend Dr. Franklin and to Maureen for your very kind invitation to come back to Chautauqua. It is really amazing to be back here, this time on the other side of the podium, and I am grateful for that opportunity, and I'm also very grateful to my family, my husband, and my aunt and uncle for coming and hearing me today. I want to begin my talk at the pearly gates. There was a diverse group of men and women who were waiting anxiously. And as it turned out, in the blink of an eye, Judgment Day was upon them. And the Lord asked them, "Who among you fed the hungry and acknowledged my bounty by praying at mealtime? Those who did, stand to the right. Those who did not, stand to the left." Christians who had recited the Lord's Prayer, Muslims who had recited the Basmalah, Jews who had recited the various barakhat on food, and others moved to the right. but the rest moved to the left. Next, God asked the really hard question: who wore the pants in your family? If it was the women, stand to the right. If it was the men in the family, stand to the left. All of the women moved to the right, and all of the men moved to the left. I guess everybody wore pants, huh? But there was one man who stood among the women, and God asked him, "What are you doing there?" His response was, "My wife told me to stand here." And then God replied, "Welcome to heaven." So as this story shows, across multiple faiths and philosophies, we do find common ethics: gratitude for our daily bread, generosity and compassion for the weak, humility when sustenance is abundant, and faith when it is not. When we think of food in Islam, we think of fasting during Ramadan, requests for halal meat, or what not to serve a Muslim for dinner, like pepperoni pizza and beer. But the story of food in Islam is much more than just dietary habits. In August 2015, while the world watched in horror as ISIS destroyed an ancient monastery and a temple in Palmyra, and the refugee crisis globally grew in epic proportion, another group of Muslims was gathering in the Middle East. Ahead of the Paris Climate Summit and following Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, Muslim leaders from 20 countries gathered in Istanbul. Their purpose was to pen the Islamic Climate Change Declaration, which has since been praised by senior representative of the United Nations and of the Vatican. During their meeting, the Muslim leaders discussed how climate change is poised to reduce the availability of food, including staples, access to food, both physical and financial, and the quality of food, including nutritional value. Experts say that these shifts in the food chain will cause food shortages, poor human health and malnutrition, humanitarian crises, and mass poverty all over the world. The Islamic Declaration called for a green economy, including food security, the rapid phase-out of fossil fuels, the dramatic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and a 100% renewable energy strategy. The leaders asked, what will future generations say of us who leave them a degraded planet as our legacy? How will we face our Lord and Creator? Their question was foreshadowed 1,400 years ago when Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, father of the Sunni and Shia schools of law, warned that pollution would render the planet uninhabitable. On the ground, efforts are also underway. Like synagogues, churches, and temples, you find mosques, jamaat khanas, and Sufi lodges across the United States that are going green. They are growing community gardens, composting food waste, and using water filtration systems to minimize pollution caused by water bottles. Several mosques are providing heart-healthy recipes for favorite cultural foods, classes like yoga, Zumba, and aerobics, and clinics on heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Some American Muslims live on the land and from the land. Others are taking their city-slicking youth into rural areas for them to learn about the farm-to-fork value chain and how they, as Muslim kids, can better honor the earth, the body, and the soul. Still others are working with corner stores to supply fresh fruits and vegetables in the food deserts of racially divided, low-income neighborhoods of Chicago. Some American Muslim communities have been doing this work for 4 decades. As you may know, Islam is the second largest and the fastest growing religion, constituting 20% of the world's population today. There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world who are immensely diverse, living in over 40 countries, speaking more than 500 languages, belonging to any of more than 70 interpretive communities of Islam, and adhering to any of the many thousands of interpretations of the Holy Book of Islam called the Quran. Noting that diversity of opinion and belief is a divine gift in Islam, today I will sketch out my own personal take on food and the soul in Islam, covering 5 themes. First, I explore food practices in the annual rituals of Nowruz, Ramadan, and the Hajj. Then, I cover how Muslim communities historically advanced agricultural production and globalized commodities to serve society at large. Third, I'll describe examples of contemporary Muslim civil society organizations tackling the global hunger crisis. Then, I'll illustrate how breaking bread together enables interfaith fellowship, resonating with the Quranic injunction that all of creation is born of a single soul. Finally, I elaborate on prayer and stewardship as food for the soul and the body, respectively. Collectively, these themes illuminate that in Islam, food practices are deeply spiritual, environmental, and moral acts that enable the subordination of the ego, the cultivation of communal life and identity, and one's connection to Creator and to creation. Food rites in the religious holidays of Nowruz, Ramadan, and Hajj enable spiritual rejuvenation, self-discipline, and social cohesion. Each entails special communal prayers, gift exchange, and of course, a feast. Nowruz, which is Persian for New Day, is observed on the March equinox by various cultural and religious communities globally. Believed to have begun 3,000 years ago by the Zoroastrians, Nowruz survived Islamic expansion. Indian merchants brought the holiday to South and East Africa. Among Perso-Islamic and especially Shia Muslim communities, it marks the new year, the first day of spring for those in the Northern Hemisphere, and represents a time of spiritual renewal and gratitude for God's blessings. Surah Yasin of the Holy Quran is typically recited on this occasion, in which Allah says, quote, "Let the once dead earth be a sign to them. We gave it life, and from it produced grain for their sustenance. We planted it with palms and vegetation, and watered it with gushing springs, so that men might feed on its fruit. It was not their hands that made all of this. Should they not give thanks?" End quote. As a public holiday in Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the former Soviet republics of Central Asia, communities distribute dried fruits, nuts, and grains, and they also serve special meals. Among Tajiks, Afghans, and Iraqi Kurds, guests eat sumptuous boj, which is sheep's meat cooked with whole wheat. Or they eat palau, which is meat or fish mixed with spiced rice. Iranian villagers make ranganak, date pastries, or ahla, which is sweet meat sprinkled with sugar and saffron, in order to honor their deceased ancestors in the new year. The Swahilis practice local customs like fishing, feasting, and dancing. Muslims and Zoroastrians often also lay out a table called haft sin, named for the 7 letters beginning with S in Farsi that lay out the table. It displays these 7 symbolically significant foods that represent spiritual recommitment and gratitude for the rebirth of vegetation. The 7 items include wheat growing in a dish symbolizing rebirth, sweet pudding symbolizing affluence, dried olives symbolizing love, garlic symbolizing health, an apple symbolizing beauty, samak, a fruit symbolizing sunrise, and vinegar symbolizing patience. The next holiday I'd like to talk about is Ramadan, the sacred month of fasting when Muslims abstain from food and water from dawn to dusk and read the entire Quran over 30 days. The first verses of the Quran were revealed from God via the angel Gabriel, the same angel Gabriel as the Judeo-Christian tradition, to the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him and his family, in the year 622 AD during Ramadan. Following the Prophet, Muslims will commonly break their fast with dates, followed by a dinner. Given that Latino and African American populations are converting to Islam at the greatest rates today, you'll also find folks who break their fast with halal barbecued chicken, jerk chicken, tacos, and tamales. In addition, Muslims also purify themselves by increasing their charitable gifts and fasting from greed, lust, anger, and resentment. Ramadan concludes with Eid al-Fitr, the festival of the breaking of the fast. Following prayer, called Salat-e-Eid, believers indulge in their many rich food cultures. In South Asia, for example, folks often eat classic biryani, a sumptuous dish of spiced meat and flavorful rice, followed by sheer kurma, a vermicelli milk pudding garnished with cardamom. Southeast Asian Muslims eat beef rendang, a spicy coconut curry, and roti john, a meat and tomato chili omelet sandwich. Adherents in the Levant savor butter cookies made with nuts, dates, and honey, known variously as kak or mamoul. And across North Africa, the Eid dinner features tagine, a succulent meat stew laden with dried fruits and simmered in the traditional cookware after which it is named. Across Central Asia and Russia, many Muslims munch on mantou, which are delicious dumplings stuffed with seasoned lamb or beef. Chinese Muslims eat yuzhang, a fried flour-based snack served with rice or soup. The last holiday I'll discuss is the Hajj, or the pilgrimage to Mecca, whose rites praise God's abundance and grace. Considered a pillar of Islam, incumbent on the physically and financially able, Hajj rituals reenact the physical and spiritual journey undertaken by Abraham and his family more than 4,000 years ago. Both the Quran and the Bible narrate that Abraham left Hagar and Ishmael in the desert. In the Bible, they are outcasts, but in the Quran, Isaac and Ishmael are both God's prophets, and Sarah and Hagar are both Abraham's wives. The rituals of the Hajj include following in Hagar's footsteps when she frantically searched for water for her parched infant son. God responded to the infant's cries, making apparent a miraculous well. Today, called Zamzam, this sacred water symbolizes God's bounty and mercy for Hagar's and her son's patience and prayer. The spring continues to nourish and purify pilgrims today. Another Hajj rite is Eid al-Adha, or the festival of the sacrifice. It commemorates Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his dearest son for God. In Judaism, it is Isaac whom he is willing to sacrifice, but in Islam, it is Ishmael. The readiness of a father to sacrifice his son is also seen in the Christian belief in God the Father sacrificing his only begotten son, Jesus. Muslims believe that God replaced Abraham's beloved son with a ram to be sacrificed in his stead. So on this holiday, Muslims will sacrifice an animal and distribute its meat among family, neighbors, and the poor in order to thank God for his mercy. The lines that divide evaporate during the pilgrimage. Malcolm X, for example, famously left behind his racialized views and embraced mainstream Sunni Islam after experiencing equality among diverse Muslims during the Hajj. Like many transformative rituals, Nowruz, Ramadan, and the Hajj are simultaneously congregational and personal, binding the Ummah in a spiritual family nourished by God. My next theme describes how Muslim groups historically have advanced agriculture and globalized specific commodities in order to sustain their religiously diverse populations who enjoyed religious freedom under Muslim rule. Muslim Spain, known as Andalusia, is a prime example. In the 8th century, Abdurrahman I founded a dynasty known as the Umayyads of Spain that ruled Greater Iberia. When he arrived in Cordoba, the population was starving from food shortages due to drought, collapsed bridges, and broken irrigation systems. Under his direction, enterprising farmers tunneled through mountains, drained marshes, and rehabilitated barren villages. They created aqueducts through deep ravines, leveled the rocky slopes of the Spanish Sierra, and cultivated the pre-existing Roman irrigation system that could only irrigate a limited amount of land. Aware that water was a precious gift of God and a limited commodity, they created means to limit waste and evaporation. Using water mills and water wheels, they expanded arable land. They were now able to produce 3 to 4 crops per year in fields that were previously yielding at most 1 crop annually. Unlike in Europe, Andalusian farmers could both rent land and take some of the crops produced from it. This empowered the multi-faith society, including those in relative poverty, to eat from the land that they rented, even if they could not own it. Farmers chose a court of judges called the Tribunal of the Waters to settle all water disputes and violations. This court sat on Thursdays at the door of the Great Mosque. Today, 10 centuries later, the same tribunal still sits in Valencia, but at the door of the cathedral. The irrigation legacy of the Moors can be seen today in the gardens of Valencia and Murcia, which are both UNESCO Cultural Heritage Sites. The Moors also led the knowledge society of their time, building on scholarship of past and present from North Africa to the Near East. In the 12th century, Abu Zakaria published a volume titled A Book of Agriculture, in which he detailed irrigation, edible flora, fertilizer use, and animal diseases and cures. Moorish scholars of various faiths discovered how to collect and reuse water, how to efficiently use 10 different soil types, fight pests, and graft trees and plants to produce new varieties. Medical advances included a specific diet and nutritional change to fight tuberculosis, and surgical tools for hypertension, which were used until the 20th century throughout Europe. Because education is an Islamic ethic, everyone, including women, lower classes, and non-Muslims, had access to free schools and the over 70 libraries, public libraries in the region that housed works on agricultural innovations and everything else under the sun. As a node in the European Silk Route, Moorish Spain provided increasingly cosmopolitan European cities with new products like rice, palm trees, lemon and orange groves, and pomegranates. The introduction of spices like cloves, cumin, and coriander, and cash crops like cotton, sugarcane, and silk led to uses in pharmacy, luxury exports, and the arts. From the 8th to the 15th centuries, the Moors globalized their practices of ecological balance, environmentalism, and agricultural advances via transcontinental trade and travel, taking food production, consumption, and commodification for the benefit of all peoples to the next level. As time advanced, so too did Muslim contributions to the world. Between the 15th and 19th centuries, Muslim mystics called Sufis ushered in another kind of revolution, that is, the coffee craze. Despite the murky origins of coffee, the earliest credible evidence of drinking Java juice is from the 15th century Sufi lodges of Yemen. Mystics drank the brew to concentrate in prayer and facilitate spiritual intoxication while chanting God's name. You might say that coffee kept the dervishes whirling. Initially viewed as a dangerous drug that emptied mosques, coffee eventually became popular with the masses, but challenged by the powerful. In the 17th century in Turkey, religious leaders preached on street corners that coffee would inspire indecent behavior, and the Sultan declared its consumption punishable by death. But eventually, the rulers embraced coffee, and Turkish law allowed women to divorce their husbands for failure to keep the family coffee pot brimming. True story. As dark roast discoed westward, European doctors claimed coffee caused paralysis, and English women said that it caused male impotence. Even Pope Clement VIII, his advisors declared it as the devil's drink, the veritable antithesis of communion wine. But upon tasting a sample, Clement disagreed. He allegedly baptized the bean and established a crucial Catholic tradition, coffee hour. Germany's Frederick the Great feared a coup by coffee guzzlers with loose tongues and wild imaginations. He preferred happy, tipsy drunks to mutinous caffeine addicts, so he banned the bean and pushed the beer. Alas, Java changed the world. By the late 1600s, Londoners were in love, paying today's equivalent of $50 a pound for coffee. By the 1700s, cappuccinos inspired the creative genius of legends from Voltaire and Balzac to Beethoven and Bach. In this way, Sufi-inspired coffee houses and Moorish agronomy and trade created community and civil society in the early days of Islam. My third theme explores contemporary Muslims who, inspired by faith, have founded organizations to tackle global hunger. Their work complements the incredible generosity of many civic groups, churches, and synagogues that have fed the poor through food banks, soup kitchens, and homeless shelters for many decades. Collectively, these efforts are vital. Today, across the world, there are nearly 800 million people who are food insecure, meaning that they lack reliable access to enough, affordable, nutritious food. A recent UN report predicts that by 2020, rain-fed crop production could drop by 50% in some countries. Land degradation, melting glaciers, and wildfires will dislocate people, erode soil, and destroy livestock. The Eidi Foundation, which is Pakistan's largest charity, supports the poor through food pantries, schools, hospitals, and orphanages. The foundation provides free food to thousands of people every day across Pakistan. In recent years, massive flooding, energy shortages, conflict, inflation, and rising food prices have driven even the middle class to solicit free food. Since 2009, the foundation's feeding centers have seen a 40% increase in clients each year. And nevertheless, 37% of Pakistanis remained food insecure in 2012. Its founder, Abdul Sattar Eidi, known as the Angel of Mercy in Pakistan, rose himself from poverty. Born in 1928 in a Gujarati village, his mother sent him to school every day with 2 coins. One was for his lunch, and the other to give to a beggar on the way. From the age of 11, Abdul cared for his mother, who became bedridden from a stroke. And when she died when he was 19 years old, he moved to Karachi, Pakistan, where he began peddling fabric in a bazaar. On the streets, he witnessed great poverty, and he saw that people could not buy food nor health care. When a mother of 6 murdered her own children and then commit suicide to end their suffering, Eidi began to beg for donations so he could create services for the poor and prevent such instances from happening again. His creed was live and help live. In addition to his work in Pakistan, he sent food aid for the 1985 Ethiopian famine and raised $100,000 to provide groceries and shelter for victims of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Asked why he was helping non-Muslims, he simply responded that Islam calls him to serve all of humanity. By 1997, the Guinness Book of World Records named the Eidi Foundation as the world's largest volunteer emergency service. Even today, if you dial 115 from a phone anywhere in Southern Asia, the Eidi Foundation will answer. Mr. Eidi lived simply but courageously. He never took a salary, never owned more than 2 suits, and he lived simply in a 1-bedroom apartment in his foundation's headquarters. In July 2016, his kidneys failed. Abdul Sattar Eidi left behind his wife, their 4 children, and the 20,000 orphans that he had adopted. Our next hero is Professor Muhammad Yunus, an American-trained economist who returned to his native Bangladesh to teach. When famine struck in 1974, he saw growing starvation around him and doled out small loans from his own pocket. He believed that microcredit was a human right, reasoning that small loans plus basic financial knowledge could help the poor to help themselves. For him, it was better to help a woman fish for herself rather than to simply give her the fish. To scale his efforts, in 1983, Yunus founded the Grameen Bank, which is today a global leader in eradicating poverty and hunger through microlending. It is a model that has been replicated in over 100 countries, and in 2006, Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in creating economic and social development from below. With his guidance, the Grameen Foundation, an independent affiliate, has partnered with the organization Freedom from Hunger for a project in Rajasthan, India. The two organizations work with grassroots groups to train more than 1,250 mostly illiterate women in nutrition, health, and household financial management. These women have gone on to train others, ultimately reaching 30,000 people. And within 2 years, food security has increased from 21% to 53% for women and children. In households where women share in decision-making power with men, the project saw increased crop variety, better food choices for children, and surges in breastfeeding. These interventions have also decreased maternal and infant mortality rates, premature births, and malnutrition among 50% of toddlers. My final exemplar was born in Switzerland, raised in Kenya, educated in America, and now lives in France. His Highness Karim Aga Khan IV, a direct descendant of Prophet Muhammad through Ali and Fatima, became the 49th hereditary imam or spiritual leader of the world's 25 million Shia Ismaili Muslims in 1957. He was a 20-year-old Harvard undergrad at the time, who then took a year off to travel the world and visit with his followers, many of whom lived in colonies or the developing world. His role as imam, a position he has now held for 60 years, includes guiding his community in the interpretation of Islam, safeguarding their security, and enhancing their quality of life and the lives of those amongst whom they live. As part of the imamat's mandate, and inspired by Islamic ethics, His Highness has founded the Aga Khan Development Network, known as AKDN. It is a network of private, non-denominational development agencies that improves quality of life for the poor so they become self-reliant. Working primarily in Africa and Asia, the network addresses food security, poverty eradication, early childhood education, and many other issues. For example, the AKDN has worked on food security in Central Asia for the past 20 years. With the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1991, the former Soviet Republic of Tajikistan was thrust into independence overnight. Under the centrally planned economy, Tajikistan's charge was making shoes and rocket parts. It did not produce much food. This is unsurprising given that 97% of the country is covered by mountains and glaciers. But the lack of food production was also strategic. Moscow kept the Soviet republics dependent and subservient to retain control over them. With unexpected independence, Tajikistan was caught off guard. Civil war erupted. The economy crashed. People began to starve. Mountain villages, where winter temperatures can drop down to -80 Fahrenheit, faced a graver situation. With the elimination of fuel subsidies, people had to burn wood, including fruit trees that they could have eaten, just to survive. They burned up to 80% of their forest to stay alive. And soon 85% of the population became food insecure. AKDN agencies first provided humanitarian relief, airlifting food donated by the USDA to the region. And over the next 2 decades, it partnered with the Tajik government, World Food Program, USDA, CETA, and many others to rebuild food security in the region via increased crop yields, improved varieties, and investments in high-value livestock and horticultural products. Food insecurity thus moved from 85% in the early 1990s to only 30% by the early 2000s. Leveraging multi-input area development, the network is enhancing infrastructure with locals to improve access to markets and services, increase arable land, and augment water supplies in small villages. Half of the loans made by the network's locally owned micro-lending agencies have been for agriculture. And over the years, AKDN has also completed reforestation and also taught sustainable land management through its transnational University of Central Asia, which focuses on the needs of high mountain societies. My fourth theme explores how breaking bread together has facilitated interfaith fellowship since the beginning of Islam. Prophet Muhammad showed compassion for the ill and the hungry, regardless of their character or creed. There was this woman who disliked him intensely early on in his prophethood, and she showed her disdain by throwing her filthy garbage on his head every time he walked by her home. And she really gained pleasure from this, and when he saw that, he thought, well, I don't want to disappoint her, so he kept walking by her home every day and let her do it. And one day, she did not throw her trash on him. And he wondered what had happened to her. He was worried. So he went and knocked on her door to inquire about her welfare. She opened it slowly, and it turned out she was ill, and she was too weak to lift the garbage pail. From that day forward, the prophet saw that she was alone and that no one was there to care for her, so he came to her home every day to feed her, to pray for her, and to clean her quarters. Weeks later, when she recovered and her health improved, she sought his forgiveness and embraced Islam. Another beautiful illustration of the Good Samaritan occurred when Imam Ali's children were very ill. To cure them, the children's grandfather, Prophet Muhammad, advised the family to fast from sunrise to sunset for 3 days. At dusk on the first night, just when the family sat down to eat, a beggar came to the door asking for food. They gave him all they had. As the sun went down on the second night, just as they started to break their fast, this time a starving orphan appeared at the door. Again, they gave him all they had. On the third night, after prayer, they were about to begin dinner when a recently released prisoner happened upon their home searching for food. They obliged him. At that moment, God revealed a Quranic verse to the prophet asserting, quote, "They feed out of love for God, the needy, the orphan, and the prisoner. They say, we feed you only for the sake of God. We desire from you neither reward nor thanks," end quote. Hence, the prophet's family, including his ill grandchildren, went without food for 3 full days. They gave away all they had to those in need. They submitted completely to God's will with full trust in his infinite grace, mercy, and justice. Upon receipt of the revelation, the 2 sick little boys were miraculously cured without medicine or human intervention. Nourishing the needy and subordinating the ego is exemplified today as well in LA County, where the only person who will adopt terminally ill children is Muhammad Zeke. Along with his wife Dawn, they have nurtured over a dozen orphans despite having a special needs child themselves. 10 of the children have died, some of whom have died in Muhammad's arms. After Dawn passed away, Muhammad has continued to care for his biological and adopted children over the past 20 years. He says, "You have to love them like your own. I know they are sick. I know they're going to die. But I do my best as a human being and leave the rest up to God." In my final theme, I explore how prayer and stewardship are food for the soul and the body, respectively. From a Quranic perspective, the purpose of life is to return to the divine origin and to leave the world improved. The world around us, that which is delimited by time and space, known in Islam as dunya, is believed to be a gift of God. It is a bridge to and a preparation for the life to come. God states in the Quran, quote, "It is he who has made you his agents, inheritors of the earth, that he may test you in the gifts he has given you," end quote. One's ultimate worth, therefore, depends on how one responds to divine favors, such as the body, the mind, the soul, time, knowledge, and material wealth. A Muslim must care for her body through a healthy diet, exercise, observing food restrictions, and avoiding excess. She protects her intellect by avoiding alcohol and drugs and growing her mind through education. She fulfills her call to social justice by using her education to understand and serve creation, such as by planting a tree, caring for animals, cleaning up a river, feeding the hungry, serving on the PTA, or even just supporting civic life. At the same time, she must honor and advance her soul spiritually through daily congregational and individual prayer. In Islam, the healthy human body is the temple in which the flame of the Holy Spirit burns. Remembrance, or the continual incantation of God's name, is the food of the Spirit and the key to prayer. It enables our constant awareness of the unconditional presence of God, remarked Imam Ali. His descendant, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, explained, quote, "Everything has a limit at which it terminates, except the dhikr or remembrance of Allah," end quote. He added that his father never ceased remembering and reciting God's name with every breath, even while eating and walking. This simultaneous bodily and spiritual nourishment is crucial for believers. Imam Ali writes, "Their hearts are in the gardens of paradise, while their bodies are at work in the world." For most Sufis and some Shia communities, meditative practice can lead one to the divine light, but it requires dedicated practice, absolute humility, and above all, God's grace. There was a Sufi mystic who rose to the highest state of enlightenment through intense meditation. In this state, she heard a voice who asked, "Who are you?" She replied, "It is me." She was denied God's vision. Again, the resolute mystic resumed meditation and achieved the highest level. And once more, the voice asked, "Who are you?" The mystic responded, "It is your servant." Again, she was sent down. The Sufi saint prayed deeply until she attained the same height a third time. And yet again the voice inquired, "Who are you?" This time she replied, "It is you." And she became one with the divine light. The moral of the Sufi story is that we become something when we become nothing. When we eliminate our ego, we can experience enlightenment. You and I become one. I and you become one. Meister Eckhart, a Christian mystic whom Sufis call a knower of God, said the bodily food we take in is changed into us, but the spiritual food we receive changes us into itself. The beliefs and practices of the Jewish mystic Spinoza similarly resonated with the Sufis. Indeed, a common goal across faith traditions is the spiritual abandonment of the self to the universal soul and the supreme blessing of direct communion with God. This is true not only of the Abrahamic faiths, but also of Buddhism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Sikhism, and others. The Quran affirms that all of creation is born of a single soul. For a Muslim to fully understand and serve creation, she must know cognitively and experience spiritually monorealism. That is, the Islamic doctrine that proclaims the presence of the soul in all existence, in matter, in animals, trees, and space itself. Every individual, every molecule, every atom has its own spiritual relationship with the all-powerful soul of God. In closing, for me, the intersection of food and faith is a deeply spiritual, moral, and socially just set of practices that sustain the body and the soul, diminish the ego, and create community. Ultimately, through prayer and stewardship, as spiritual and material sustenance, a Muslim may experience the essence of the Creator and creation, and may better the world. From Prophet Muhammad and Imam Ali to the Moors and the coffee-crazed mystics, from Hajj pilgrims to Eid celebrants, from Muhammad Yunus and Abdul Idi to the Aga Khan, we find people of faith inspired to strive for social justice. In Islam, the acquisition of food, wealth, and other resources is to benefit all of creation, not just the individual soul who possesses them. The question motivating the social conscience of Islam is not only what have I achieved, but what have I helped others to achieve? Each figure, in their own way, has answered this call creatively and beautifully, seeking to lift those who life has marginalized to be self-reliant and live with dignity, as so many of the world's rich faith and philosophical traditions encourage. For me, the common thread woven through these traditions can be encapsulated thus: the light of God inheres in all of creation. By loving creation, we honor and love God. As we part ways this afternoon, let us remember that we are all created from a single soul, and in the divine that binds us all, let our souls feast on the Persian poet Rumi's powerful words: "You and I should live as if you and I never heard of a you and an I." Thank you.
Dr. Zahra Jamal, what a marvelous and inspiring treat you have given us. And I think we're all amazed that you have included, packed in so much wisdom and the spirit and the heart of Islam in these few minutes with us. We are so grateful. Thank you so much. And thank you. And there's so much that I suspect might be new to some of us here. So please come to the microphones and let's have a conversation with Dr. Jamal about all those marvelous things that she has just shared with us. Please come.
I don't bite.
Thank you for your talk.
Sure.
I'm neither Muslim nor Jewish, but I had heard once that halal and kosher food restrictions or customs are very similar, and I wondered if you could comment on that.
So the question is about halal and kosher food restrictions. I think the methods and practices that underpin each of them are distinct. My understanding from Jewish friends is that kosher rules are more strict than halal ones. For example, to have something created kosher must be done by a rabbi, I understand, at least in some interpretations of Judaism. In Islam, halal simply means that the animal has been slain according to Muslim principles, a method that is called dhabiha, which means that when it is done in the name of God, that the animal must not suffer, that it must not see or smell blood from a previous sacrifice, and that the life of the animal is thus respected. So that's what halal is, and any member of the community can perform that. Thank you. Oh, sure. Yes.
Thank you. You are obviously from the Ismaili sect of Islam,
Mm-hmm.
and it's my understanding that the Ismailis have adopted modernity. Can you comment on whether other aspects of Islam, other groups, have adopted modernity the way the Ismailis have?
Okay, thank you for the question. There are many Muslim communities today who have adopted modernity, as the questioner has framed it, basically living with the times and sort of engaging with the world. So for example, the Bohra community, which is evident in the diaspora here in the US and in various parts of the Western world, but centered in India and in Yemen. They're one example. There are many Sunni and Shia Muslims who are also very progressive, as you might call them. So it is something that you do see. But I think the difference is that for the Ismailis, you probably see more folks, and that is probably because there is a spiritual leader. Among the 1.6 billion Muslims that are in the world and among the 70 plus communities that each of them belongs to, the only community that has a living spiritual leader and guide who is apparent in this world and a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad is the Ismailis. With the spiritual leader, the Aga Khan. And so because of his guidance, I think that you find the community to be more progressive or more living with the times in light of his remarks, his guidance. I hope that helps. Sure. Yes.
Hello. It's my understanding that food is often used symbolically in different rituals that are take place, that milestone markers in life. And the example that I personally got to witness is at a wedding. And the wedding that I saw, the bride's family had prepared the feast, and then there was the covering of the bride and groom with sugar to sweeten their union. I was wondering if you could address the symbology of food in different ritual practices.
Okay, thank you for that question. It's a fantastic one. I think that a lot of those practices are typically from cultural traditions that have been overlaid onto religion and taken on the guise of religion, but are not specific to the faith tradition itself. So that's probably what you're witnessing, because you would see that practice among certain ethnic groups within Islam, but you might not see it among others. So it's less about religion than it is about culture. I would say that within the religion, some of the food practices that are symbolic, as I mentioned, was the haft sin, that table that is laid out during Nowruz, also the distribution of the sacrificed meat during Eid al-Adha, and also the symbology of water, which is highlighted in the Quran as sort of this life-giving force, this ultimate form of nourishment, right? And is often used to and thought to purify one's body, one's soul, one's sins, etc. So you'll see it used in that way. Among some Sufi communities, what you will also find is that their sheikh or spiritual guide will write out a prayer in ink and give that paper to the member of the community or the order, and they will read it, they will dunk it in water, and the ink will then dissipate. That water then becomes inky, and they drink it. And that purifies their body, and they're able to imbibe the blessings. And that then is something that carries them forward. So that's another example. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal, for such a good presentation. I have two quick questions. One, access for non-Muslims to the Aga Khan Center in Toronto. Can you tell us how that might work, when and how we might be welcome there?
Sure. So with Ismaili Jamaat Khanas and centers pretty much all over the world, you are allowed to visit and take a tour and to see the space, to attend lectures, seminars, cultural programs, etc. And that's typically during the daytime or on invitation for a program. But during prayer times, that is meant only for members of the community. And that is because those members of the community have taken a specific oath of allegiance known as bay'ah, to take the Imam or His Highness the Aga Khan today as their spiritual guide. And so therefore the practices that occur within that space are meant only for that community who have taken that oath. So that's why you can't be present during prayers, but at all other times it's available for tour and so forth. And if you haven't been to the Toronto Centre, I would highly recommend it. It is a gorgeous site. And visit the museum too if you get a chance.
We look forward to going. One more last question. Mm-hmm. You mentioned three prominent heroes, and I love that portraiture. Thank you for sharing those with us. Might you share a brief portrait of a shero that you would lift up to us?
Of a shero?
Yes.
Gosh. Well, yeah, I think Malala. Malala is amazing. She, as you all know, her story, another Nobel Prize winner, the youngest one to win it, and who survived an assassination attempt at the age of 15 by the Taliban, and who has started the Malala Foundation, where she's promoting education and empowerment among girls and women all over the world, focusing on places in the developing countries where girls' access to secondary education is either limited or non-existent. And she is also working specifically with Syrian refugees who are in the camps and now living in Lebanon and Jordan. So I think that her work in education, in economic development, etc., is amazing. And I think she really is an angel from another world. So she's my shero. Thank you.
What is your favorite dish, and what do we absolutely have to try?
Chicken samosas.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Chicken samosas. Yes.
Yeah, hi. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your experience here at Chautauqua. Sounds like you've been coming for a while, and how it is a mostly Christian community, how that has changed as a Muslim over time, and how you think you could increase the diversity here, or have that be an inviting experience.
Sure, thank you for the question. So I first came to Chautauqua as a young whippersnapper in high school. I had my first lemon poppy seed muffin here and fell in love. And yeah, I mean, since then, it has always been an amazing and loving and embracing community. I think one that is remarkably spiritual, but also very humble, and very committed to education and to learning and to embracing all forms of knowledge and all peoples. So I've felt nothing but love and kinship with this community. I think that over time I have seen it become more diverse, which I think is a huge blessing. So for example, the Abrahamic Lecture Series, I understand, since 2005 has been renamed to be the Interfaith Lecture Series, so that other religious traditions could also be discussed and engaged with on campus. And I think that's amazing. I think the other comment I would make is that, you know, I think all of you have lots of friends who are probably from very diverse communities, and bring them out, you know, let's fill these rows with, you know, more diverse groups and see how we can best learn from each other, because I truly believe that that diversity is a divine blessing, and it's really in that sense of difference that we can learn the most from each other and really work together to leave the world a better place. Thank you.